Hey Reddit.
What conspiracy theories turned out to be true?
Now you should believe. For more videos, like and subscribe.
My father, who I previously thought was insane, was convinced the meds the military used to prevent malaria caused serious and permanent behavioral health issues. 30 years later, I was prescribed a different malaria med as a preventative before a trip. And I jokingly mentioned my father's theory to the doc. Mefloquine. Yeah, that's actually true. That's why we switched to this one.
Mefloquine dreams are so vividly fricked. Source: Camp Phoenix, Afghanistan.
Holy shiz. I took this 3 times on my honeymoon. I will never forget the nightmare I had. I stayed awake the whole night. It was completely horrific. I never knew my brain was capable of such fricked up shiz.
Ernest Hemingway believed he was being followed by the FBI. It was passed off as paranoid delusions by the medical community and the world at large. But the Freedom of Information Act revealed that Hemingway was an amateur agent in Cuba during the war, but also seen as a potential communist sympathizer by the FBI, who did later follow him. It played a major role in his suicide, though obviously there were many other factors.
What?
Yeah, Ernest Hemingway's life was all kinds of fricked up. Got divorced and remarried like 3 times. Got attacked by lions in Africa. Worked for the KGB. All that good stuff.
Governments and corporations are actually spying on us.
Hope they like Nightcore and Rocket League and sissy hypno porn.
What's sad about that is when it was revealed to be true, we all just shrugged because it was something we all believed anyway.
Colombia's government and high-ranked military officials killed farmers and poor people just to get personnel promoted and support from people. The bodies had uniforms just like the ones guerrilla soldiers used to wear. People started noticing that something was wrong with these guerrillero bodies when the boots in some of the bodies were backwards and a lot of people went missing from villages.
Colombia is super corrupt. I think they even found out recently that the high-ranking military were selling weapons to the guerrillas for cash. Many of the weapons were U.S. aid to the Colombian military.
The former president of Colombia named Álvaro Uribe ran a death squad in his home state and is being investigated for witness tampering and bribery. The Colombian intelligence service wiretapped his phone, and that's the former president. Imagine how deep that type of stuff goes.
My grandfather was afraid of moving into a nursing home or living alone. He was convinced people working in elderly medical care were out to get him. A few years later, a local nurse is in the news as a serial killer who believed she was doing the right thing, ending lives early. Around the same time, a home visiting nurse, who was supposed to help him, got frustrated and hit him. So I removed her from the house, which was something he wouldn't have been able to do. After reporting that nurse everywhere, she was still doing home visits for an acquaintance until I told him to.
As someone who works in home care myself, I cannot believe she was still in the field after that. Here in the US, that is enough to lose your license. Not just your job.
Angels of death are very real. Very prolific. And probably don't get caught as much as people might hope. I suspect plenty unsung killers have a body count that would put Ridgway to shame.
Watergate. It started out as a conspiracy theory, but gained enough evidence to turn into the scandal that we all know today.
And spawned unimaginative gate titles for conspiracies until the end of time. SMH.
I lived in Oregon in the 70s and 80s. Everyone always talked about how the Evergreen Airport was used by the CIA, but they always denied it. The truth finally came out and the airport ended up closing afterwards.
There were several of these black CIA airports. One of the most infamous being the one in Mina. Same deal. It was a conspiracy theory until the court documents came out.
In the 90s it came to be called something else and the name eludes me at the moment. They flew primarily out of Columbus. Oh. And I only know this because my husband at the time went to work for them, without realizing who it was until he was in too deep. He was an aircraft mechanic and avionics technician. Freshly retired from the USAF, they recruited him. They ceased operations out of Rickenbacker Field about 3 years after he went to work for them. I don't know where they moved to because they wouldn't tell my husband unless he agreed to move with them. My dad was pretty sick at the time, so we didn't accept the move.
The global elitist pedophile ring.
Was just gonna write how Alex Jones was being called crazy and taken off of YouTube. He certainly is eccentric, but he was right about that one. Even named the highest ranking people who participate.
Project MKULTRA. Basically the government was experimenting on people. It is super freaked up. Link.
MKUltra was 50 years ago. Imagine how much better they are at mind control now. Perhaps all these mass shooters are programmed to kill so the government can justify spying on the public and eventually disarming us.
Fun fact, my university was heavily involved in the program, and I now live within walking distance of the now unused asylum where many of the experiments took place.
CIA putting LSD in the water supply. Except it was only a handful of extremely small, less than 800 pop towns in the American Southwest. And the outcome was not, we have a mind control serum. But instead, that deeply troubled a lot of rural elderly people, who had no idea what was happening to them.
Imagine drinking a cup of water and suddenly you're on the worst trip of your life. I'm sure a lot of people would think that's awesome, but tripping without knowing why you are tripping would be fucking scary.